Hi, and welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark-Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge. We recently had a conversation with a younger friend of ours she's like 18 years old now. And she went through a lot of depression as she was growing up through her teenage years. And at some point last year, she just decided she was done being depressed. She just decided she was done being miserable. So she went on a personal development journey, or started her personal development journey consciously. Now, in the Myers-Briggs system, she's an INTP, and she decided that she was going to get out of her shell and, use what we call her co-pilot process of exploration. And she decided that she was going to choose to not be unhappy. She was going to choose to be happy. So that was about a year ago. And she now has people in her life where she was talking about how frustrating it is to engage with other people who are either, always looking to her to help solve their problems for them, or when she does give them advice or coaching. I mean, these are people who are her peers, basically around her same age bracket. When she gives them advice, she's like, I don't see anybody ever actually taking it. So she's like, so I don't understand why I should keep dispensing advice that nobody takes. So we got on a conversation about, when you figure out some strategies, some tools to navigate the world, when you figure out some things that have worked, whether they've worked for you as an individual or they work in general because they're a great model. Now, in the case of our friend, she was having people approach her, but oftentimes we get excited by it. Like, this thing has really worked for us and it feels really good. And we want to share it with the people that we love. We want to share it with friends or family members. We've gotten emails from people who are like, oh, hey, I love your stuff. It's really made an impact on me. And I try to get other people to listen to your podcast. And we've had a couple of people say, it's just not landing with them. and that's okay on our, from our end. But from their end, it's frustrating because, how do you introduce something that's been life-altering to you to somebody else when they might marginalize it or kind of poo-poo it or go, yeah, that's not really what you're supposed to be doing, or whatever the response is that's not favorable. How do you really encourage somebody else to take seriously the stuff that's been really impactful for you? So we were talking about, I don't think that this is an unusual problem. I think whenever anybody finds something that is really meaningful to them, you'll see this when somebody like maybe joins a new religion, or maybe when they find this like breakthrough diet or exercise program. Anytime something has massively improved your life, either physically, emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, you want to share it with other people. And what's the best way to share what has been so meaningful for you, with them?
Yeah. And we've probably all had this experience. I know that, you listening, you probably have been to a workshop or a seminar where you've learned something exciting and you brought back to talk to your spouse or your child or your parent. And not only was it met with potentially disinterest, but there's also another level of this. Sometimes it's met with hostility, or maybe hostility is a strong word. It can also be met with suspicion. Like, well, now, how are you going to change? How are you going to be different now that you've gone and learned this new thing? And I think people are a little panicked that maybe you'll start relating to them differently. And so they don't have to get suspicion around what you've just learned or what you've been opened up to. So it runs anywhere from disinterest to maybe the middle ground of suspicion to hostility, like actual anger, and like, this person's acting so angry toward me just because I'm trying to change myself and better what I'm doing in the world. This doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, I've noticed that established programs like maybe the Landmark Forum, there are hate sites around programs like that where they'll say, the Landmark Forum it ruins families, it breaks families up. And I know a couple of people who not only have gone through the Landmark Forum, but they go through it like once a year. Like, it's important for them to keep going through it. And one of the reasons why is because they feel like, if they don't go through it once a year, they lose touch with the part of them that's radically honest. Now, I've actually never been to Landmark, so I cannot personally vouch for it. I do know that it's had a positive impact in some of my, friends' lives. However, I don't think that its goal is to break up families. But let's pretend you go to a place like Landmark or any other workshop that encourages you to be just completely radically honest. And you start realizing that you might be living a lie. Maybe your entire marriage has been predicated on a lie. So you come home and you go, hey, I've got some stuff I got to talk to you about. And maybe the two people go, yeah, maybe this is not right for me. Or the one person goes, I've been living a lie, and you might be perfectly happy in the marriage, but I'm realizing that I'm making us both miserable, and maybe you have to try something else out. And so it opened them up to this idea that they're wasting their life in a miserable situation. And the other person is, maybe they're not as okay with it as they're playing along, but they, for the sake of, social propriety, think that they have to stay in the marriage. And now you've got one mate who's leaving the marriage or encouraging the marriage to split up, and the other person who's clinging onto it. And now the family members get involved, and why are you separating, and why are you getting divorced? And it's like this big brouhaha. And then the narrative down the line becomes Landmark just breaks up families because somebody had a family experience in which that's what it seemed like to them. Like, this person went to Landmark and now they're breaking up families. So the suspicion, you just articulated it, that somebody might have suspicion around a personal development path you're taking, or a specific tool or an instrument or a workshop that you're taking, because they're not sure how you're going to come back and relate to them. But I think that's a really unconscious level. It's really unconscious for us to think, I don't want that person to change because my relationship with them will now change. It becomes more like the thing itself, the tool itself, is what's suspicious. And so, you and I met at an NLP conference. NLP stands for Neuro-Linguistic Programming. And, when we tell people that, that we met at a conference for Neuro-Linguistic Programming, it runs the gamut of, oh, that's really interesting. What's neuro-linguistic programming? All the way to, oh, those people are just trying to control your brain, or they're just trying to brainwash you, or it's like this big, this big suspicious thing. And what's funny about neuro-linguistic programming is that it can be used for evil if you want it to be. However, you and I ended up using it mostly for, we took some strategies away for coaching, and we use it for our relationship and mutual coaching.
Yeah.
So it wasn't really anything that we brought to the world that was massively brainwashed us, not that I can tell anyway. It actually ended up becoming, kind of a part of our sort of psychological diet. And it was really healthy for us. However, there were people who were really suspicious of it. So how do you come home and go, hey, I went to this really great seminar, this 5-day seminar in NLP, and it totally changed the way I see everything. And let me tell you about it. And then you've got people holding up their fingers in the shape of a cross to go, no, I don't want that at all. So do you push it on them? Do you become a new proselytizer? Do you say, no, it really was awesome and amazing and it changed my life? Or do you back off the pedal? Do you give some space? Do you go, oh, that person I guess they're just going to think that it's suspicious and that's just them, and, but then you find yourself going down a path that the people that you may have been most intimate with, they're not going down that path with you. And it feels really lonely. So do you encourage them to go down that path so that you have company, or do you kind of give them some space and go, well, I guess that's not your journey?
I would say that's probably one of the biggest things when you're a human, a person, and you're learning, you're learning something new, you're on a personal growth path. I think the things that prevent you from that the most are the people in your life. I mean, there's going to be hard work involved. There's got to be stuff you've got to see that you can't, it's going to be challenging for you. But the people the relationships you have, I think, are the biggest piece. I would say it's 80 to 90% of most personal development work is, if I develop and grow here, what is it going to alter my relationship? And then it's this idea, people in your life have learned ways to get you to do the things they want you to do, or feel the emotions they want you to feel, or control you in the ways they control you. And as soon as you start growing, as soon as you start going down this growth path, they instinctively know something's going to change here, and I won't be able to manipulate this person. I won't be able to sway them or persuade them emotionally or logically that I used to be able to. Oh no. And for them, it's just as much of a risk. For you to go on a personal development journey, that journey is a threat because you might alter your relationships. And they have the same threat without the control on their end, right? Because now you're in the driver's seat. You're saying, I'm going to take control of my life. I'm going to learn this new skill or this new way of thinking, this new way of being. So you start getting in the driver's seat of your life and you start going down this road. And yeah, it's scary. You might lose some relationships. You might alter some relationships. Things might happen with the people around you. You might not relate to your parents the same way you did, or your children or your spouse the same way you have in the past. And that's terrifying. But think about the person who's not in the driver's seat. In their mind, this is happening to them. You come home from that seminar, this aha, and now they feel completely out of control. You've taken control of your life. You're in the driver's seat, and they don't feel permission to do that for themselves. And to make it worse, you may be driving off the sunset, and they're not willing to get in the car with you. And that's a panic moment for them, potentially. Like, oh no. And so that's why some of these things might come out, is because they're panicked. They might not have you in their life, potentially, depending on what that situation is. I don't know if it's a codependent relationship or if it's just, the typical dynamic that's there right now. And that can be a fright. That can be scary, I think.
Yeah. At the NLP event, it was taught by Wyatt Woodsmall, who, learned NLP directly from Bandler. I can't remember Bandler's first name. Richard? No.
I think it's Richard Bandler.
Richard Bandler, the person who came up with NLP. And his comment was that people don't want you to change because they just figured out how to manipulate you as you are. So if you change, they have to figure that all out all over again.
Yeah.
And I think that's not entirely inaccurate. I do believe we co-manipulate all the time. That's just how we work, right? We're always trying to get people to do what we want them to do. We're manipulating ourselves all the time. So I think this concept of that people just figured out how to manipulate you. I think that's the worst way of saying it. I think a equally accurate and nicer way of saying it is they just figured out how to relate to you in a way that's useful to them, right? They just figured out
a predictable way. They know how to relate to you predictably.
Yeah, they figured out the dynamic as a certain, it went this direction, and if you start changing, then you're a node in the system that makes the dynamic change. The two nodes are going to relate to each other differently now, you and them. And at one side, it is a matter of if you make big changes and you start becoming healthier and you become a better version of yourself, you will mirror back to other people their bad behavior. It's kind of like when you dance. When you're in a dance with another person and you're just both just completely totally rocking out and you're just completely dancing, your brains out. And then all of a sudden one of you stops and just looks at the other person blankly. The person who's still dancing is going to start feeling self-conscious. They're going to be like, well, what? Wait, I thought we were dancing. You just stopped and now you're looking at me. Why are you doing that? We were both in this dance and now I'm the only one dancing. Why did you do that? And it could almost feel humiliating. And when you start doing some real, serious, authentic work, people around you might be mirroring back to them the fact that they're not doing that work. And that might feel really uncomfortable to them. It might feel a little embarrassing or it might feel just... that it's a mirror back that they've got some stuff that they're not handling and that they should be handling. So that's one side of the token. I think the other side too is we don't actually know where other people are at in their development. It feels like some people are totally static or just completely stagnating. It feels like some people just are not making any progress at all. But we don't always see the progress on the outside. Sometimes it's really, sometimes it's always a very internal process. And for some people, it takes a long time for it to manifest. For some people, it takes a lot of influence and persuasion, and they might be, older when they start doing their development work. They might have had a lot of stuff to get through. So if you make the assumption that you're the only one on the personal development journey and that you're just causing shame in everybody you run into because you're this big mirror back to them of their own bad behavior. That could be true, but it might not be the most helpful way of looking at it. It might be a lot more helpful to think they're in the stream of their own development projects, and it's not really for me to judge where they're at. It's not really for me to figure out what's going on there. Now, that's not to say that everybody is as invested in development as everybody else is. Obviously, there are some people who are going much, much slower than others. And there are some people who just really couldn't give two craps about becoming a better person. They might have neurological issues that make them not care. They might be truly violent people. They might not be good human beings. And I say that not in a moralistic way, but they cause destruction around them and they couldn't care less. They're not life affirming, which I've mentioned in previous podcasts is one of my personal ethics. So I'm defining it very subjectively when I say they're not good people. I mean, from my personal ethical stance, I would not call them life affirming. I would call them life destroying. And so they're not good according to my stance. That said, most people are interested in improving themselves, at least to some extent. They're at least interested in improving their circumstances and situation. Again, not everybody, but most people would like to be in a better space. And oftentimes people recognize that if they want to be in a better space, if they want to be in a better position contextually, that work starts on the inside.
Yeah. And this isn't just people who aren't into this kind of stuff. So I'm going to get a little personal. I'm going to use a personal story here. And this is the first thing that came to my mind. So a couple months ago, so Antonia and I are both actively developing ourselves, or we would like to be at all times. So we're always looking for things to continually do. So right now, because of my personality, I'm an ENFP in the Myers-Briggs system. And that means that my co-pilot, what we call the growth state here, Personality Hacker, is something we've nicknamed authenticity. The technical name is introverted feeling. And it's really about getting in touch with my core values, about my identity, about who I want to be and how I want to show up to the world. And it's a very introverted place for me to be at. I've been doing a lot of this internal work. And I know a couple months ago, you and I had some struggles because I was doing some behavior that probably wasn't optimal behavior. And some of it looked very unhealthy. And I remember us kind of having a disagreement. I said, look, I'm going through some things and I need you to give me some space here. And I think you and I had some tension in our relationship over this. And I was like, I'm growing. You can't really see it because it's an internal process. Can you just hold space? That's what I'm asking. And you were like, yeah, I can totally do that. And you just backed off for a minute. You know, when I say a minute, that's metaphorical. Obviously, backed off. And I was given some freedom to explore some of this growth I was doing and some of the behaviors I was doing that didn't seem like they were very healthy behaviors. But it was important for me to go through some of that. And I'm still going through some of that as well. I mean, I'm always growing that. I feel like I'm a fairly developed person, but I don't want to stop. I want to keep pushing myself to become a better version tomorrow than I was yesterday. I'm not picking on you, by the way. I'm just saying this is the first thing that came to my mind. You probably have these examples the other direction where you're working on something and I'm not holding as much space.
Wait, how would you be picking on me? That would be picking on you.
Why is that?
Oh, because
you were kind of challenged by this. You were frustrated. Some of the behaviors, you're like, this is like...
Oh, because our dynamic
was changing. It was morphing and switching, and some of the things that I was doing they're throwing some challenges your direction. You're like, wait, I don't know if I'm cool with this challenge that's thrown my direction. You're no longer the person I knew 2 months ago. What's happening? So we had some tension times, right? So I'm not picking on you for that. I think that's my illustration in this. The whole point I mentioned that was... It's not just people who are completely unaware. You go to a seminar and learn something, come home and you're excited to tell your parents or your spouse or your children or your friends, and they meet you with like cricket noises or hostility or apathy or suspicion. It's not even people that are unaware of what you're doing. It's even if you are with people that are committed to growth and they're committed to your growth, which I know you are, Antonia, committed to my growth, it can still bring tension into a relationship between people. So it's something that I think we all that are interested, and you, the listener that's listening right here with us, if you're interested in personal growth, it's something you're never going to graduate from. You're going to have to continually refine this and how you go through this process, no matter where you are in your journey, whether you're at the beginning and there are people completely unaware, or if you're in what I consider a very loving, committed, pair bond relationship with you. It still comes up as a challenge sometimes. Yeah.
No, I totally admit that as you change, there's a part of me that feels like, but I can't manipulate him anymore based on our previous dynamic. When I say there's a part of me, it's deeply subconscious. It's not at all a conscious thought. I'd be like, I would never do that. But I mean, that's how we behave as humans. So I can't really say that that's human behavior and then say that I'm the only one that's not doing that. Obviously I am. And I think that that's definitely true. I think also, I want to go back to this idea that people are at different levels of their personal journey. And this idea of, do we become proselytizers to help them out? Or do we just completely leave them alone? And do we then feel almost like we're martyrs, like I'm the only person working on myself and all these other people aren't, and they're so unhealthy, and I'm the person who's trying to be healthy? And it makes me think of, probably a year ago, we did a podcast on the drama triangle. Mm. And the drama triangle, just to harken back to that just briefly, it's this concept that people will see the world in terms of victims, villains, and heroes. And when you get caught in the drama triangle, once you put yourself in one of those three positions, you've got to find other people or situations to fill in the other two spaces. So if I'm a victim, then I've got to find a hero and I've got to find a villain. If I'm a hero, I've got to find a victim to go save, and I've got to find a villain. And if I'm a villain, I've got to go find a hero and a victim. So no matter which position I put myself in, I've got to go find other people to fill out the set, so to speak. And the antidote to that is what's called the empowerment dynamic. And the empowerment dynamic goes ahead and keeps those three slots, but just puts more healthy fixtures in there. So instead of a villain, you've got a challenger. And situations or people can be challenging to us. And it's not like they're a villain. It's not like they're like twirling their little mustache and going, wahaha. They're just people showing up as them. And that's challenging to us sometimes. Instead of a hero, you've got a coach, somebody who isn't there to save you, but might just be the person you need at the time to give you that little bit of wisdom that you capture and run with. And instead of victims, we have creators, people who create their world, as opposed to simply being at the receiving end of the world around them. And I think when we do a lot of personal development, it's really easy for us to want to jump into the hero role because, we may have felt like we were victims and then all of a sudden now we're creators. And we want to save everybody else. And so we do that by shifting back into the drama triangle and becoming heroes, right? We want to save people. We want to save them from themselves. Especially if you see it, like we just met somebody who's a really great person who clearly needs a lot of healing work done. And in the meantime, they're actually physically damaging their body through substance, a lot of alcohol, and a lot of just really self-indulgent behaviors. And they're young at this point, so they're not really feeling the effects. But now that, I'm like 37, I'm like, ooh, dude, that's going to catch up with you. Please stop doing that. And I want to like go in there and do something about it as if that's my business, but it's not. But there's like a hero part of me that goes, oh man, I've got so many tools and resources. Let me just sit you down and teach you all these tools and resources. And then, you'll have the same epiphanies that I've had. And the kid is really great, and there was clearly no current interest in that. Or maybe there was a little bit, but not to the effect that, or level that I would have liked. But that's because I was in that moment wanting to be a hero. I wanted to save them. But they're not a victim. They don't need saving. They're a creator of their world, and they're creating their world as they choose to. And if I am in a position to be a coach, if they've invited me into their space to do that, then I'm happy to do that. But it's not really my place to push that upon them. So when we have these situations where we really want other people to benefit from the same things that are impacting us and changing our lives, regardless of what that is, we can see ourselves as the new proselytizer for this thing. And let's take the Personality Hacker podcast. I have been overwhelmed by some of the feedback that we've gotten from people on the iTunes reviews and on our blogs and emailing in. People will say, like, your content is literally changing my life, which is amazing. And they usually say something like, and I'm letting everybody that I know, if a person feels that way, usually they want other people to, to get onto it. And so they'll say, I'm letting everybody know about your podcast. And some people it's not their thing. And that's perfectly fine because we don't have the cure-all for everything. We have a perspective that's helped us. We've got some tools that we've picked up that have been very impactful in our life. We thought, hey, let's share them with other people because it might be impactful in other people's lives. And it's kind of, on some level, it's kind of like throwing spaghetti against a wall. Sometimes it sticks and sometimes it doesn't. And that's perfectly fine. So if you're on a personal development journey and you found certain tools that really impact you, you can definitely share them with other people. I'm not saying that, like, if you're listening to Personality Hacker Podcast and it's changed your life, I'm not saying, stop sharing it with other people. No, please feel free to share it. We're down with that, totally. That said, if it's not their thing, that doesn't mean that they're not on a journey themselves. It doesn't mean that they're a victim that you have to save. They're a creator. They're creating their reality. They're creating their existence. And they get to do that. And you don't really get to determine whether or not they're making progress or not. Sometimes you can't see progress for a long time. Now, when it comes to our family members and our closest friends or intimates, if they're not making progress fast enough, right, that means that the dynamic will change between the two of you. If you are outpacing them in the level of your personal development, it's going to alter the dynamic. I'm not saying judge them as like falling back. It's not that the dynamic changes because you're judging them. It's that the dynamic changes because you're running together with somebody, right? Maybe let's just say you're running with a whole group of people, right? And you're all on pace and you're all running together and you're keeping each other encouraged and maybe you're conversing every once in a while and going, oh, we can totally do this. And you're cheerleading each other. And then you realize, you look around, you're noticing that some people aren't running anymore with you. They're behind you. And then as you keep going on this marathon, like more and more people are dropping off to the side and they're like, you catch up, or you go forward, I'll catch up later. And you're like, it's really starting to thin out here. Like it's even like this whole group of people that I was cheerleading and they were cheerleading me, like they're starting to drop off the sides of the road. And pretty soon it might be like you and a couple other people, or maybe just you and one other person, or maybe it feels like it's just you. And that's a lonely place to be. The more you focus on personal development for your mind, it's like an exercise regime for the body. Exercise is personal development for the body. This kind of development that we're talking about in our podcast is personal development for the mind. And just like a running regime, like I had a friend tell me one time, I took up running and I was running a couple miles a day for a while. And I'm not a natural runner. I always think of, in Lord of the Rings, where Gimli, the dwarf, says that dwarves are not marathon runners. They're natural sprinters, very, very, very dangerous over short distances. I'm like, dude, that's totally me. I'm an okay sprinter, but man, like running 2 miles was like a huge feat for me every day. I remember telling a friend of mine, I was like, it is hard to run every day. It is really hard. And he goes, well, yeah, if it was easy, everybody would be doing it. And I was like, oh yeah. I don't know why that was so mind blowing for me. But it was like, oh yeah, you're right. That's why not everybody has a running regime, is because it's hard. It's the same thing with personal development. That's just the thing that I had decided to focus time and attention on. And it's hard. And if it was easy, everybody would be doing it. But it's not easy, so very few people are doing it. And it puts me in a position where I can coach others if they need that. I am in a position where I've got some really cool strategies and tools that I can lend to other people or kind of show them how to use. But it doesn't mean that I need to go run back down the road and grab people by the scruff of their neck and pull them with me on this journey. I can't even do that anyway. That's totally unsustainable. There's no way I have enough energy, psychological, emotional, or physical energy inside of me to do personal development for 2 people. Like you always say, you can't want something for somebody else that they don't want for themselves.
Yeah.
Or you can't want it more for them than they want it for themselves. You just got to let people be. I've noticed that if I want to be really persuasive to another person, if I want to really, truly encourage somebody else to use and utilize the same tools that I'm using, the best way to do it is to demonstrate it through my own personal happiness. If I'm successful, if I'm happy, if I'm not engaged in a bunch of drama, if when I am engaged in drama, because, I've let myself slip or I'm just not showing up well that day, if I own it, if I apologize, if I do my best the next time and people see that of me, suddenly my toolbox becomes really interesting and intriguing to them. Suddenly the question is, why is it that you guys have such a great relationship? I know people will tell us that we're really lucky to be together, and I think they're right. I think we are lucky. We found each other, and we are definitely, I don't believe in soulmates, but if I were to believe in soulmates, I would say that yours is mine. You are my soulmate. I liken it to the theory of entanglement in quantum physics, where, you take an atom and split it, and the particles are separated, and the theory is that even if they were separated so far as to be on the other sides of the universe, when one switches direction, the other one instantaneously switches direction because they were originally entangled with each other. And that's how it feels like us. Like, I feel like we were originally entangled in some atomic level. And then when we found each other, we're like, oh yeah, you. Yeah. I know you. And so we are lucky in that way. Absolutely no question. And at the same time, we work really hard on our relationship.
Yeah.
We've gone through things that may have split me up with another person at an earlier time period in my life. So we are lucky, but we work really hard.
Yeah.
And
maintenancing. I mean, it's a lot of work.
Yeah. And that is obvious to other people. When they call it just luck, like we just happen to be incredibly compatible and then that's the end of the story, I think that they're intentionally not looking at the recipe underneath that, right? Like if somebody is in a not very happy relationship and they look at 2 people in a happy relationship, whatever those 2 people are doing, go emulate that. And I think on an unconscious level, unless we've got a massive resistance against a tool because it's going to show up, it's going to reveal some cognitive dissonance inside of us. Unless we're actively avoiding cognitive dissonance, a part of us goes, I want what they have, so I'm going to emulate what they do. And that's the most persuasive thing you can do. If you really, really want to, quote unquote, proselytize to other people about these cool, awesome things that have changed your life, just keep being happy. Keep being successful in that way. And by success, I mean, it could be monetary success, but I define success more as like, what is the most common emotion that I'm experiencing? Am I experiencing happiness? Am I experiencing a fulfilled life? Am I feeling on fire for life? If I'm feeling like Mr. Rogers said, it's such a happy feeling to know you're alive. Like, that's success for me. And if it is a happy feeling to know that I'm alive, I feel like other people will recognize that, and they'll seek me out for coaching, and then I'll do what I can, and they'll take what they need, and then they'll go create their own world.
Or you'll create hostility again. Like you bring this back. I have this story where I grew up in a household where if you acted badly, it was expected that as soon as you were aware of the behavior you exhibited, you need to go make it right with the person that you behaved badly toward, or the persons. And so I remember, extended family, I had this situation where I was extremely emotionally charged in a way. And I think I pounded my fist on the table. I was like, no. And I was defending myself. I felt attacked. I felt like somebody was blaming me for something I didn't actually do. And I felt like I didn't do this thing. So I remember pounding, this is years ago, pounding myself on the fist on the table. And I walked out of the room, and I remember like closing the door really, really hard behind me to like slam it, going upstairs and like bursting into tears upstairs. So frustrated and angry. I felt accused about this thing. And I thought, sitting there, I kind of came down from the emotion of feeling like I was the victim here. And I'm like, wait a minute. I just acted like a complete ass downstairs and totally yelled at a person, and another person was an innocent bystander. So I was like, I'm going to own this. I'm going to go downstairs. I'm going to own this. And the person's house that this was in was sitting there on the chair. And I went down. I was like, look, I totally behaved inappropriately just now. I will totally own that. I am really sorry for my behavior. That is unacceptable for me to behave that way. And the person looked at me and said, you don't get to do that. You don't get to just behave any way you want. Come ask me to forgive you and just gloss over it like that. Stood up, walked out of the room, and would not hear me talk again. And I was standing there. This is the first time it ever happened in my life, about 10 years ago or so. And I was standing there flabbergasted because I thought, man, I'm going to be mature here. I'm going to own my own behavior. Because I'm not a type of person that does this all the time. This is not a all the time behavior. And when it does, I want to own it. So I try to own it, and here it didn't work. And I'm like, wait a minute, like all this personal growth I'm trying to work on in my life, all this owning my stuff that I'm trying to work on actually just made this person angry with me even more when I came back to apologize and set it straight than if I had just let it go. And it was like a trigger to me, like I had never had this experience before. This was like a brand new thing. So if you do this also, if you're trying to live well, and obviously I wasn't behaving well in the moment, but we're all make mistakes, right? Let's set it right when we can. If you're trying to live well, I don't think you're always going to be met with, oh, I see that person's living a good life. What you're actually doing probably for a lot of people is mirroring back to them the unwillingness that they would have in that situation. There's no way this person would probably humble themselves and come and ask forgiveness or apologize to me if they had behaved that way toward me. And it was a really difficult experience. I had to work through that. And to this day, it has never been resolved with this person. There's never been another talk of it, no resolution. And actually, we have a severed relationship at this point because other reasons, but I'm sure they're stacked on top of this. It's weird to me. It was weird to me that other people weren't like, yeah, I want to live in a happy world too, and let's reconcile this. It was more confusing than disheartening to me, because I was like, why would you want to hang on to pain and agony and if you don't have to? Like, why would you do this? I was so frustrated and so confused that was a great learning moment for me to realize that not everyone's going to respond well to you showing up in the world, trying to do better than you did yesterday.
Right. Well, and that's also, I mean, I don't know this person, but that does sound very controlling and manipulative to me. However, again, I mean, I think we're kind of having a yin-yang conversation, which I think both components are incredibly important to remember and hold space for when you're doing development work. That when somebody's hostile, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're a bad person unwilling to do personal development. And at the same time, they might be behaving in a way that's bringing a lot of toxicity to you and your development experience. So it's a matter of being able to hold both things at the same time. It's a matter of being able to go, it's not really my place to judge and assert on top of them that they're a bad person or not doing any inner work, because I don't have a view into that world. Like, that's their private world, and there might be stuff happening for them in there that I just don't have access to. However, by the same token, when their behavior is a response to me like that, and there's toxicity there. They won't allow for a developed conversation. They won't allow for an evolved conversation. They won't allow for, reconciliation. I really don't see any reason why I have to be around that person, right? Like, they might be doing their own development work that I just can't see. And also, it's not happening fast enough or it's not happening in our relationship to a point where it's okay for me. So I don't think that this idea of holding space and not judging other people means that we just have no boundaries. Or that we don't go, hey, your behavior is really crappy. Like, I'm not okay with it. And it might be you working through your stuff. I don't know, but I'm not down with it. I'm going to go ahead and sever the relationship if it happens to a point where they won't honor your boundaries. I think that's totally acceptable and totally appropriate to do. But at the same token, that doesn't mean that, most of us have to process through toxicity by talking shit about other people. It's very rare when somebody is able to, process through, a person behaving badly towards you without going, yeah, well, I have some stuff to say about that, at least to somebody. So I'm not saying that every act of, going, sort of venting frustration is somehow an unevolved act. It probably is in the grand scheme of things, or the higher consciousness level, but I don't know anybody who's so 100% there that they won't give some sideline commentary on other people's bad behavior at some point. They just perfectly hold space for everybody. There's probably some monk. Well, there are people who have gotten to a level of conscious awareness where they just don't play in that game at all. And they're very, very, very rare. For the majority of us, we're still working some stuff through. And I'm a little dubious about even them. I think that every once in a while, they probably have an ungenerous thought or two. That said, there's this balance we have to have of recognizing that not everybody is on the same path that we are. Not everybody is progressing the same level we are. Sometimes we have a tendency to put ourselves in a hero role where we feel like it's our job to fix other people, as opposed to simply be an available coach. By the same token, sometimes we can overvalue our growth and where we're at on our journey, and we'll see somebody else's growth as a reflection back to us of our bad behavior, and we'll demonize them and assume that they're not as developed as we are because they're behaving in a way that reflects back to us something we don't want to see. So it happens both directions too. So it's being mindful of this. It's being mindful that we don't really get to determine where somebody else is at in their journey, but we do get to determine how we're going to let them impact us. That's pretty much the only thing we're able to truly control, is whether or not we're going to sever the relationship. So it's a matter of being gentle and being generous with our opinions of others, being generous with where people are at, and at the same time, having strong boundaries and recognizing that we're not okay with people stepping on our boundaries over and over we're not okay with them not honoring our boundaries, right? If they're showing a lack of respect for our boundaries, we're not okay with that. And we don't all have to be best friends. And that includes family members. If a family member is a toxic component for you, your personal opinion on feelings on this may vary. You might feel like you have to have a relationship with all of your family members, and that's perfectly fine if that's a value of yours. You don't have to let them impact you in that way, though. So yeah, it's a matter of holding all of this. It's not simple. It's not a simple answer. It's a matter of juggling all of this and just making sure that you're on the best path that you can be.
So let's get a little more practical. I'm just going to throw out a couple ideas here on the practicality of this. So we've talked a lot about, what if you're met with resistance, hostility, uninterest. Let's assume that you are in an environment where people are somewhat open. Just a few things to think about. I think, when you come back from learning something, or maybe you take one of our online development course, maybe you go through the owner's manual, for example, or Intuitive Awakening, or one of our programs even, and you study this stuff and you're like, wow, this has changed everything. I found out I'm an intuitive and it's opened a whole new world to me. And now I see why I've thought this way my whole life. I see why this is the way it is. Oh, that makes so much sense. And you want to share it with people. Well, one of the things that I think can help with this is use the language that people are already using to share your ideas. So I think this is just kind of a practical tip is, the idea of intuition might trigger a bunch of things for people, like women's intuition, things like this. So if you can find ways to contextualize things for people and how they already understand, like if you ever hear me talk about our website, I will never say we've got blog posts on our website, because I know we have some people who are of a generation that don't know what blogs are. They're a little unfamiliar with what a blog post is. So I'll always say you can find articles on our website, because I know almost everybody that's listening knows what an article is, but a blog post might be confusing to them what that is.
I totally say blog post.
I know, but I consciously don't, because I'm trying to contextualize the language for people listening that may not know what that is.
That's smart. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I do that on purpose. I might have slipped up. I'm sure someone's going to go, aha, I know in episode 44 you said blog, but you get what I'm saying. Like use the language that people are using. When I'm explaining podcasting to somebody, if they're unaware of podcasting, I say, what's basically radio on the internet? Oh, radio. I get that. I know what radio is. It's on the internet. Okay, radio on the internet. That makes sense. Because the word podcast might be confusing to them. So if you're talking about personal development stuff, are there ways you can talk about it with people in your life using the language they already use? And that can help bridge the gap just in the communication process to start, because that initial communication is important, because that's going to be the first thing they interact with, right? So you come back from a woo-woo conference. When I say woo-woo, you know what I mean? Like I have female friends that go to goddess empowerment conferences where they do like feminine empowerment exercises and they do womb healing. Doesn't that sound weird? Like goddess empowerment, womb healing, that to a lay person that has never interacted with somebody that has been to one of these experiences is going to be like, what are you talking about? That sounds crazy. So you come back and start using words like goddess or things of this nature, it's going to trigger people to turn you off or to not maybe listen. So just the language you use, I think, is a very practical idea on being the person that can come back and not trigger people in your life. Yeah,
basically you're saying meeting people where they're at. And so...
Yeah, that was a bit much better. I should have just not said everything I said and you just said meet people where they're at.
No, well, and I want to be careful to indicate that if you've gone to one of these seminars, we're not insinuating that it is weird.
No.
We're saying that, and
people are going to think it's weird.
And I'm sure that's not I'm sure that's not a surprise to you. Unless you are in a really enviable context where everybody's doing the same thing. Most people, when they go to something like that and they come home, they're going to be met with a little bit of suspicion or a little bit of like, what did you say earlier? We were talking about this and you're like, people will hear the kind of seminars that we go to and they'll be like, you spent your money on that? Like, can you get it back? Right? Like somehow spending money on something like that just seems incredibly irresponsible. Of course, a flat screen, enormous TV is a good, solid investment. Because that's hours of entertainment.
You don't miss any episodes of The Voice at all.
That's right. So it's really a matter of where people have their priorities. However, that said, meeting people where they're at, using language that they can relate to is, I think, a big deal. Or it's a big part of that. Yeah, and I think just being... I think this idea that you hit on it. I want to bring it down to a practical term. This idea of holding space. You talked about this kind of earlier. I don't know if you use those exact words, but this idea of when people are acting in certain ways around you that's frustrating, that doesn't make sense. I think there's so much power in just being present and not reacting, but instead being thoughtfully responsive. It speaks volumes to the people around you. They're like, what happened to you? You are so different. And you don't even have to come and say, hey, I took this class from personality. I went through their Intuitive Awakening program and this has changed for me and I'm all excited. All you have to do is like show up, kind of owning yourself, not kind of. I need to root that word out of my vocabulary. Owning yourself and being present, holding space, and they see you improving yourself. And I think that example that you set is so powerful for others. Yeah, I think our energy speaks very, very loudly. So what do you think? Do you feel like there's, do you feel like this is something that you deal with? Do you feel like this is something that's really, been a frustration for you? Or do you have a strategy you can share with the community that will help people interact with and relate to the people in their life when they do have something that has been profound for them? How do you go about it? And what's been the response? We'd love to hear about it. Yeah, over at personalityhacker.com. You can read our articles.
You can also download episodes of the podcast, find out more resources there. Personalityhacker.com, tons of information. You can check out all of our programs and trainings. We also are on the social media platforms, multiple social medias. I won't list off the entire list, but the best place to start is facebook.com/personalityhacker. Or if you're more of that Twitter crowd, twitter.com/personalityhack.
You can also leave a rating and review on iTunes. Now, I got some flack recently from somebody who said, well, what if I'm not an iTunes user? What if I'm on Android? Well, the answer is I can't seem to find a single Android platform that really allows for a solid feedback mechanism. There's like rating and reviews all over multiple Android platforms. So if you're an Android user and if you know of a single consolidated rating review system, please let me know what it is and I will start totally hawking that.
Yeah.
But so far I haven't found anything. So that's why I keep saying feel free to leave a rating and review for us on iTunes. That's the one platform that we seem to have the most success in consolidating those reviews. And let us know what you think about the podcast.
Yeah, Android, Google didn't do themselves any favors by discontinuing the native podcasting app that came with the Android system. And now you've got to use a third-party app, which we're on pretty much all the ones I can tell that are the major ones. And I think you can leave reviews under those apps, but there's no native application that comes with the Android platform. So that's a little bit of a crazy thing Google did. I have no clue why. So that means that iTunes now dominates the podcast world.
We're going to get some feedback from Android users. But that's okay because they'll educate us and then we'll know better. So thank you very much for joining us on this week's Personality Hacker podcast. I'm Antonia Dodge.
And I'm Joel Markwit. We'll talk to you on the next episode.